Hi, my name is Rohit. I'm a Director of Engineering at Cinezip Softech. Today we will build a single page application using Backbone, RequireJs, underscore, and jQuery. Here are the objectives for this tutorial. Number one, we'll build a very simple application and we'll modularize the code, JavaScript code, using RequireJs. Then we'll write Backbone model and view as modules, and we'll try to see how a backbone view can render a backbone model. Then we'll go ahead and enhance the backbone view by using underscore library, and the backbone view will use a micro template. Then we'll go ahead and use a collection in backbone to go and read from a Restful Web Service. The next step would be to get rid of a simple CSS and to use SaSS and to use some kind of variables in order to change the colors. The final step would be to optimize the project for production deployment by using RequireJs Optimizer. So we are ready to begin. Make sure you've got following things installed on your machine. You need a RequireJs install, you require Ruby install, and you require a Ruby gem install for SaSS. Also, you need to go to RequireJs and download a r.js file which is required for Optimizer. So let's begin. This is our project. I'm using WebStorm to build this project. If you see, this is my HTML document. I'm going to make it a simple HTML5 document, and I'm going to name the document as to-do app. Next thing which I'm going to do is I'm going to give a title saying this is a to-do app, and I'm going to go to my Chrome and test the application. There it works. So that's the first step which we have. The next step which I'm going to do is we'll use a number of libraries. Here in the JS folder we have got a libs folder which has backbone library, jQuery library, RequireJs library, and underscore library. To begin with, the first thing which we'll do is understand what RequireJs really does. So typically we end up including a script over here which has some kind of a code. When it comes to RequireJs, instead of doing that, we will use RequireJs, and RequireJs will in turn call other script to get the work done. So this is your typical script which looks to be okay. So we have included a RequireJs script. What we will do next is we will create one more JavaScript file called as main.js. In main.js, we'll say a message main.js loaded. This will tell us when the script is loaded. Now instead of loading the script directly, we will ask require.js to use the script for loading. So here we will say data main js main. Remember, when you use RequireJs, you don't need to give the extension .js. Now since this is done, let's go back to our JavaScript, to our Chrome, and try to run it. This works. Let's see this one more time over here. I'm using RequireJs. To RequireJs, I'm using the data role data main to tell RequireJs to go and load the library main.js. This is the first step. In the next step, what we'll do is we'll define two modules, module 1 and module 2. What we will ensure is main.js loads module 1 and module 1 in turn loads module 2. This requirement is because main.js depends on module 1 and module 1 depends on module 2. Let's go ahead and write those particular classes. Let's define module2.js first. In order to define a module, you need to define it with a keyword called as define. In this case, what we will say is module 2 is an object which has a name module 2, and we are going to return this object from this particular module. This object could be a class definition, this object could be an object itself, this could be anything. So what we are doing is we are saying define, and we are returning module 2 from the function in the define. Note this module name is module 2, that's how it is known. Now let's go to module 1. Let's copy paste this particular thing over here. And here what we will say is I require module 2 for loading, and I get it. And then I'm going to define this. Another way of doing this thing is what we can do is we can simply put a console log saying module 2 initialized. Similarly, we can put a console log saying module 1 initialized. Also, we'll print the value of the name of module 1. So module 2 name is name. This way we can ensure that we are getting the correct module. Now note, in module 2, this module doesn't depend on anything. That's why they're declaring the function directly and returning module 2. In case of module 1, we are saying that it depends on module 2. So we are saying load module 2, that is load module2.js. Once you load the JS, whatever that JS returns, which is module 2, pass it to the function. Now you can have more than one arguments over here. You will need to have more than one arguments over here to match that. So if you got 2 arguments over here, you will have 2 arguments over there. We'll see that in some time. This is how we define modules and how we define modules with dependencies. Next step is to load modules. So loading modules is more or less similar. So in this case, I'm going to say I want to load module 1 and I want to execute it. So I'm saying this is more like an import. And here also I can say the main module is loaded. Main module module 1 name is module 1.p. So that's the simplest thing which we can do. And just to make it a bit more thing, we can say main Let's go back to our code over here, and we'll say, go to the console, press enter over here, and it says main loaded. And if you see, we are expecting main2 to be initialized first. It got initialized first. We got module1 initialized after that. We are saying module2 name is module2. We are saying main module is loaded. Then we are saying main module loaded, and it said main module1 name is module1. So this way we have been able to modularize the code and define dependencies and use them. So this is how we use RequireJS. Now the next step would be that we'll remove all this code and we'll go and we'll try to see how to use Backbone. So let's go there. Let's clear these two JavaScript files. And here, let's remove this code as well. What we'll do now is we'll declare proper folders. We'll call them, we'll start with the models. So in the model, what we will do is we'll define todo.js. And as usual, we'll define a module. Now before we can do that, what we really require to do is we're going to use Backbone, and we need to inject the Backbone dependency before we use the Backbone. So what we'll do is we'll go to main.js and we'll configure require.js. So we'll say require.js configure, and what we're going to do is we're going to give RequireJS some shortcuts so that we don't have to load Backbone class by giving this big name, which is going to be quite painful for us. So here we are configuring Backbone and saying, hey, these are the paths. Whenever we use the name jQuery, you should go and look at load this particular file. Whenever we say underscore, what you should do is you should go and load this particular file. Same thing applies. Backbone, we want to go load Backbone, and we're going to say load Backbone. And lastly, we'll use text. Text is actually used for templates. So that completes our particular thing. Now I'll show you why this is required. Once I go to to-do, the first thing which I need to do is, in this model, I want to say, give me Backbone. So the function which is going to be called when this is loaded will get Backbone. That's how you load the dependency. So you're loading Backbone as a module, and then you define your to-do model by using the special construct of Backbone called as backbone.model.extend. And finally, we're going to return to-do model. Now we're going to configure this model, and what we'll say is, by default, the model has a content which says empty to-do. Think about this as a field. And second thing is, there's an initialize method in Backbone which is called when the model is initialized. So here what we will do is we'll type this. That completes our basic model. Now let's just go over here and let's try to load this. So what we'll do over here is we'll say models/to-do. This is how you're telling that that's the first thing which I need to load up. And over here you will get to-do model. And here you can very easily say where model to-do model is equal to new to-do. So we're treating this more as a class. And we can say console.log to-dos default content is I hope this is right. So let's just go and try to run this. So the thing ran. We got the model initialized. It's just a matter of finding why this is undefined. Because of a small mistake, we just had to say defaults. And if you go back over here, we go over here and we say it will say to-do's default content is empty to-do. Let's learn a bit more about this. Anytime I can say to-do model.set and I'm setting a new content here. You will see it now. It will set a new content as AA. Also, what I can do is I can pass the same content via the constructor, and if I do that, I get that particular value. So right now I don't want to pass any of these things. This is good enough for me. What I would like to do now next is do things in a proper manner, which is I don't want to use the model directly. I'll define a view, but before that I'll define something called as an app view. So let's go there. So next up is we'll go back to the index.html. We'll define a place where we want the app view to display itself. We'll say there's a div with the ID placeholder. This is where the contents are gonna go. And if I go back over here, you will see the change reflected. Next, we will define a folder called as views. In the views, we will say app. Here we'll define jQuery module because you would like to use jQuery to write something. We'll define backbone, and we'll just leave these things over there right now. So what I'll do is I'll get $, and I'll get backbone. So this is where I have my app view defined. I'll say console app view loaded. Next I'll go over here, and instead of loading this thing, I'll say views.app, and I'll say app view. And now the idea is to simply say and this will be the only thing which I want to show in my main.js. Now let's just see if this runs. We got an error. Let's see why we got this error. We got this error because we're not returning anything over here. So if I just return an empty string for now, and I run this code. Let me see this again. So instead of empty string, we need to return a function. This is a temporary arrangement so that I can just get rid of the error, and that is it. I'll come over here and I'll see my app view is loaded. Now what I want to do over here is define a view, and I'll say the view name is called as app view, and in fact it is a backbone view. And what we'll say over here is a function called as initialize, and another one which we will declare called as render. The initialize function is called automatically. So if we say console log app view is initialized, then we'll just call this dot render. It's a good idea to separate the rendering functions, and I'll say app view is rendering. And then at the end I have to say return app view, which is the correct thing to do. And if I do this, I see app view is initialized and app view is rendering. Now what we really want to do is we want to put something under this particular area. So what we'll do is we'll use the EL element of backbone, and we'll say that is in fact you need to put this view under this jQuery placeholder. So that's how you do it. And next what we'll do is we'll say this dot el dot html app view is loaded, and let's see what does it yield. So you see that app view has rendered itself over here. So that's a good progress. What we like to actually do is not to load a static text, but to in fact load a view. So we will write a new view called as to-do view, which will display the to-do model. Let's see how to do that. There, we will create a new JavaScript file called as to-do, which is going to be the view. And here we'll say define again jQuery backbone let's begin with these two things, and I'll get these things to my function. Again, var to-do view is equal to backbone and return the to-do view. Now time to configure this thing. Similarly, we'll have initialize function. Over here we'll say console.log to-do view initialized. We'll put another function called as rendering, and we'll say rendering. We'll make sure that this is calling the rendering function, and simply now what we'll do is we'll go to our app.js and we'll say views load to do, so I get a to do view. Now here I'll say to do view is equal to new to do view, and simply I'm going to say to do view.el. El is the element. So let's see what does this print. So you can say the app view is initialized, it internally goes and loads the to do thing which is initialized and rendering, but nothing shows up over here. So we need to show the content of a to do model over there. So let's go back to the to-do.js. Now before we do that, let's go over here and declare that we require the to-do model also. So we're gonna have to-do model. So I'm gonna say to-do model is equal to to-do model, capital, and I'm going to actually pass it inside the view. And when I pass the model like this inside the view, and I go here, I should get the same model under options in the view. So let me just print this and let's go ahead. There's a spell mistake. Let's take care of that. Let's see why this problem is there. This error was occurring because we wrote a code in a wrong class. Actually, we have to put this code in the view over here. Let's see, what do we see now? So we see that the model is now available, and let's try to print the value of the model. Say content. So we are saying that to-do view got a to-do model with the content as XYZ, and it got an empty to-do model. So we actually want to display that over here. That's what we'll do next. So we will come over here and we'll say $this.el.html. And we'll simply say, so basically this .el represents the element for this particular thing, the DOM element. So here we're gonna say this dot options model dot get content. So let's just go over here and do this. So we see the empty to do appearing over here. So that's the first example. Let's go over to the code one more time. We declared a model by saying backbone model extend. The default content is empty to do. We initialize it. In the initialize, we just logged some message. In the to do view, we extended the backbone view. We had an initialize function which calls the render function. The render function takes the element of to do, uses jQuery on top of that, and says that the model which it received via a constructor, it's going to dump its value inside that. In the app.js, what it's saying is this view is supposed to be rendered in placeholder, which is this div. It has an initialize function which calls a render function. The render function creates a model, it creates a view, passes the model to the view, and then renders the view inside itself. Now if I just change the content over here to something else, you will see that that change will be reflected. So you see new to do appearing here. That's how it is. So this example is going good so far. Next step is that we will be using an underscore library. So instead of dumping things this way, we'll use HTML template. Let's go and declare a new folder over here called as templates. In the templates, we'll declare HTML file called as to-do, and here we'll just say div class is equal to to-do, and we'll say now this looks awfully close. This looks very similar to the JSP scripting, if anybody has done JSP scripting, and that's what templating is all about. We used to do these things on the server side. Now we're doing these things on the client side. So that's our template. The next thing which you need to do is go to the view, and we'll require a couple of more libraries. We require an underscore library, and that's how we're gonna get this over here. Then we require a template itself so that we can write into the template. So here we're gonna say something special called as text, and then we're gonna say templates.todo.html, and for better understanding this, I'm just gonna put it in next line. So the fourth parameter is gonna be todo template. Now comes the interesting part. I'm going to declare a template here. I'm going to say template, give me a template object from this particular template. And once I have this, I'll say this.template because it's a part of this particular class. I'm going to pass the model itself. And let's see if this thing runs properly. So now see this, and I do see a new to do. Now what we'll do is we'll just add a new CSS. We'll call it app.css. And we'll define the to-do thing. We'll say its padding is 10 pixels, margin is 10 pixels, this border is 1 pixel, solid blue, its border radius is 5 pixels, and its background is red and blue. And finally, we need to include this in the HTML page of ours. And we see the new to-do appearing over here. So let's go to this thing one more time. We declare a template. We are passing the model, so we're directly using a JavaScript inside this evaluation tag. This is more like JSP. Let's go to the view. We require underscore and the template itself, so we gave it. We got an underscore library and the template. The template is a DOM object representation of this div. What we did is we declared a template and we created a template from this DOM object representation. Next is we actually took the template and we passed the model to it, not rendered things, and it gave us back this particular application. So that's the next step which we did. Now that's clear. Next thing which we'll do is we will actually write a JSON file which will kind of mimic a RESTful service, and then we will try to call that RESTful service. So this is a JSON directory. I declare a file which I'm going to call todos.json, and here I'm going to create a JSON response saying this is something which I'll get from the server. Then I'm going to declare a couple of tools in this, to-do1, so I'm putting 4 to-dos, different names. That's my JSON response. Next thing which we will do now is create a backbone collection. A backbone collection should be considered as a data source or a store. So let's just write this thing. So I'm going to create a folder called as collections. In this, I'll create a collection for to-do, and I need to define a RequireJs module. So again, let's start. I require backbone. I don't require jQuery because it's model content. I require a to-do model. Simple as that. So I have backbone over here and I have a to-do model over here. Now what we're gonna do is we're gonna define the to-do collection by saying backbone collection.extend, and similar thing. What we do always, we're gonna return this to-do collection. Now let's just configure this. First thing, what's the model? The model is to-do model, which we have. Second thing, what we want to do is we want to load this thing from a JSON RESTful API. In our case, it's gonna be simply this file. Lastly, this file, if you see, contains a root called as result. What we really want is this array. So we need to tell the backbone collection that you need to read under this. So we're gonna say a function called as parse, which is called when the data is read. It receives the data. So we're gonna say you receive data, just give me the result part of it, and that's what I will use to populate a list of to-do models. So this is what I have. I'm pretty much done with this. The next step is to go to my app.js and try to load this particular collection. Actually, it will be the app.js, and we'll go and make things work over there. So in the app.js, I require one more thing, which is going to be the collection. So I'm going to say collections to do. Let's put this on the next line, and let's say to do collection. Now what we'll do is we'll remove this method over here. We'll also remove this particular part over here. Here's the reason why. We want to render only when we fetch the data. So what we'll do is, first of all, we need to create that collection. So that's a to-dos, new to-do collection. Then we'll say on if any change happens in the data, please call render function of this scope. Then we finally say to-dos, please go and fetch the data. That happens, this guy console is rendered. So we'll just type over here, data is fetched, and we are ready. So let's just run this and see if actually things are working. So there's some problem. Let's see what that problem is. So it's saying model to do. This is not correct. It should be models to do. So let's just go to collection. Here it should be models. Let's run this again. So it says data fetch. If we look at a network, we'll see did fetch the to do JSON, and the result is over here. So things are going good at our end. So next step. Now we have things over here. Now we should start rendering. So what we'll do is we'll go to the to-dos collection, and we'll say for each one of them, iterate over them, and here we'll type the value of each and every to-do to-dos. Let's see if that works. So let's see what's wrong. It should have printed some value. Let's just see if the parse is called. It's not showing that. Let's see what's wrong. Looking at the response, and this is the last semicolon. I think that's the one which is causing a problem. So this needs to go. Let's try again. So we see data is fetched to do 1, 2, 3, 4. So things are running good for us. Now the next step really is to create views for each data which we are receiving. So what we'll say over here is var to-do view is equal to new to-do view, and we're going to just pass the model what we are getting over here, and then we need to append this model. Now if I use keyword this .el over here and say append, which is use el right now is a JavaScript object, a wrapper object, and I actually want to say do this. The problem with this is this now conforms to this function. So what we'll do is we'll say var element is equal to this.el outside, and then instead of this.el I'm just going to use elements, and let's see what happens. So we saw everything coming over here. So what we'll do is we'll also say element.html and we'll say clear the content. So let's just see if it clears the ... It does. Let's revise. Declared a collection, gave the model as to-do model, gave the URL as a JSON file, implemented a function called as pass which says what to read from the JSON file. We had a mistake earlier over here of a additional semicolon, so it's still comma, so it wasn't working. We corrected that mistake. Then we went to the app.js, we loaded the collection, we registered an event, and we registered the callback function as render. Then we said go and fetch. Once the fetch happens, render is called, and we're pretty much sure that our to-do is populated, collection is populated. Now we iterate over the collection, we create a view for each model, and then we append it to the particular parent element. So that's what actually happens. Now so far things are going good. We are able to do with the collections. Now the next thing is let's work with this app.js. Now this app.js is actually just a CSS file. So what we really want to do is first of all what I'll do is I'll just move it to a CSS folder so it becomes easier for us to see. I'll collapse the JS folder, we don't need it anymore, and I'll correct. The path is already corrected over here. So the problem with this is if I want to change the color, so let me change things a bit. So in the placeholder I'll say class is equal to to-dos over here, and I'm going to say to-dos, and I'm again going to repeat the padding and the margin, and let's say I repeat number of things except I'll make the background as yellow. Then I also want to say that do this only when to-do is inside to-dos, and I run this and it comes this way. This is what I want. But what happens with that is see the number of things I'm kind of repeating over here. I'm repeating the same padding, margin, the color, the predefined colors over here, blue and yellow and blue and red. There's some things which are really over here. And if the CSS keeps on growing and I need to change it, I need to change it at every place. Plus this way of declaring a CSS is really painful because I have to manually map things. So that's where we would move our attention to SaSS. Now let me take you to the website of SaSS. It's pretty simple. Go to sasslang.com. First thing you need to do is you need Ruby, and you need to install a Ruby gem. So we'll say gem install SaSS, and what you do really is run this command. This command will keep on running continuously whatever changes you make to your SaSS file. So what we'll do first of all is I'll show you how to do this. So first of all, I'm just going to rename this file to a CSS file, and I'm going to keep this as CSS. Now we will generate the app.css used from app.css. For doing that, what we're going to do is we will go into Backbone demo, we'll go into the CSS, and we will run this command which we see over here. We're saying watch this file, and the moment it changes, generate the other one. So I'm going to say app.css, and I want app.css. So let's go over here and you'll see app.css generated. Typically a CSS file is a valid SaSS file, but we're going to make a lot of changes to this to see what we can do. Making changes to this. The first change which I'll like to do is nest this to-do inside the parent to-do. That's what I like to do. And then I'll just resynchronize. I'll look at the app.js. If you see, it makes the changes. There's to-dos and there's to-dos or to-do. So this is the first thing which happens. It's a lot more easy to read. So when you have this parent element and a parent class and a child class, and you want to have nested things, it will look different. Yeah, this doesn't look very nice, but this is just an example, so you understand what I'm saying. That's the first thing. Nesting works. The second thing is trying to use CSS variables. Now let's say we define some color. We say color 1 is blue, color 2 is red, and color 3 is yellow. What we can say over here now is use the colors as defined in the variables. So here is where we get maximum reuse. So this helps in theming. So let's say you have a content and you want to theme, you want to change the font, you want to change the color. You don't have to go to the entire CSS to change it everywhere. That's where it helps a lot. So let's just synchronize this again and see. Yeah, it is there. Blue, yellow, blue, red. If you don't believe me, let's change the blue to green. Synchronize again. So this is happening because my command over here is running. It's changing. It's basically checking what's changing and detecting it. So it's green over here. So if I go over here and run this, you will see the border now is green. And if you don't see that very well, let's change this thing to blue. And if I go over here, changes to blue. Fine. That's just one part of it. Now the second part is, let's say we are saying, std, we are saying standard width is 20 pixels. What we can do then is we can say, we can use maths directly, and you can say standard width minus 10, and below we can just use standard will into 2. And then if we go over here and we check this out, something went wrong. Put is this no space over here. So let's change it. Let's see, it should work now. So we'll see things just change because it changed some CSS variables. So that's one of the parts which I wanted to say. Second thing is when we use this border radius, many times we use a very complicated border radius. Let me just write it down so you guys understand what I'm trying to say. So I will use border radius and I'll say Moz border radius. Then I'll say WebKit. So repeating this each time becomes a pain, and that's where you welcome CSS import, SaSS import. So what you can say is, I'll create a new file called as rounded.css, and I'll copy those things over here. And what I'll really do is I'll say, and I'll pass a radius. Default is 10 pixels. And I'll replace this with this. So that's like defining a module. And over here, all that we have to do is say I want to import rounded, and here all I'm going to say is include rounded 5 pixels, and here I'm going to say include rounded 3 pixels. And let's see if this actually works. Semicolon missing over here. So let's see. Something went wrong. Let's check what it is. Mistake in rounded, so we fixed that. So now if you go to CSS, you will see that it's repeating these things over here and over here. So if I go over here and I've actually go and run it, you will see that the rounded corners have changed. So that's a very good feature of things where we include kind of macros in CSS. So that just looks very good. So let's just repeat this once. You have got app.scss. You got a script running over here, which is actually running because you said this command. It looks at app.scss and creates app.css whenever we make changes. You are defining CSS variables over here, nested elements over here, imports over here, macros over here, and ultimately you get this file. So that works very well. Now only one step is remaining, which is to look at a network, and I'll actually expand this a bit more. And let's look at the network. If you see the network, a lot of things are happening over here. It's we're loading a lot of things one by one, and it's taking us a lot of times. There are 16 requests, and that's not good for a site to run faster. So what you're going to use is we're going to use RequireJs to optimize things. So let's see how do we do that. So what you do actually is, first of all, you go into your JS directory and you dump a file called as app.build.js. This is the file. Here we'll declare things in the manner app.requireJs requires it. So we have a function, and in the function we have got an object, and we're gonna say the app dir is actually the parent dir, because we are inside a JS directory, but the application directory is actually outside. So that's the one. We will say the base URL for doing all optimization is the JS directory. Once we start from the app directory, so all optimization needs to happen over there. Then we'll say that the directory where we want to actually dump the optimize file is outside. So we're gonna say backbone demo -optimize. Then what we're gonna do is we're gonna declare some paths, because what's happening is we're using some shortcuts. We need to redefine those shortcuts over here, and the best way to do that is simply to go to your main.js, copy these paths, dump them over here. Actually, it's more like this. And make the keys string. That's a path. Now you need to define what's the modules which you want to actually optimize. So I'm going to say that the name of my module which I want to optimize is called as main. And that's what I have over here. Now what I'm going to do is, so having done that, what we're going to do is we'll go to our command prompt, and I'm inside the backbone directory. What I need to do is I need to go inside my JS directory, and here you will see that my app.build.js is there and my main.js is there. So what I'm going to do over here is also what I'd like to show to you is that we have got require.js. We downloaded this file called as r.js for optimizer. We kept it over here, so it's actually one directory outside. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at now. Let's go back over here. We will now run the command called as node require.js r.js -o app.js. This will now go to the main.module. We will go to all the other files, and we combine all these files into a single file. That's what it will do. So it's saying that js.main.js includes everything, including the HTML template. Now what we want to do next is we have this site running over here. We're going to say new tab. We will say, so one more thing which is there is we're talking about a new directory being created called as optimized. So if I go outside, this is where my site is optimized. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say inspect, and go to network. Here if you see the network, the number of small files which have been loaded asynchronously, and I'll say optimize, and you'll see that over here there's only one file which is loaded, which is the main.js, and there are no other files being loaded, and there are only 8 requests, and over here it take 434 milliseconds. Let's just see, and there were 16 requests over here. So that's why things are different between this and that. So that's how we optimized using require.js. Now the thing to consider here is that we actually included all these files into a single file, and then we're talking about asynchronous module loading. And people might say, then what's the use of using require.js? The thing here is you may exclude some files because you don't want to include everything in one go. There are some modules which users rarely uses. You can exclude those things from require.js optimization, and they will be loaded at runtime. So that's a good idea and it's a good way of loading things. So this is require.js, and that's the end of the tutorial. Coming back to a README file, we did all the steps which are required. Finally, we just completed a step which is required for production deployment, and we are done from our side. Thank you.